Hello everyone and welcome to part 3 of the Spider-Man Retrospective. Last time we took a look at the two amazing Spider-Man films and we went in depth about why they weren't so amazing, especially the second one. Following the flop that was The Amazing Spider-Man 2, Sony knew that they had to make some changes, and that opportunity came when they made a deal with Marvel Studios to allow them to use the character in the MCU, but Sony actually retained the film rights. This allowed Tom Holland to be properly introduced in Captain America Civil War and interact with the other heroes. This led to some key character choices that people don't particularly like. To avoid another origin story, Peter was introduced 6 months into his career as Spider-Man. Uncle Ben was already gone, he was an established hero, so we didn't have to worry about going through the exact same events for the third time. So let's take a look at Peter's history in the MCU and see if these films are better than the ones that came before it. Very quickly before I get into Homecoming, I want to touch on his appearance in Civil War. His character in this movie is, in my opinion, perfect. Although it does introduce a lot of the things that people have problems with throughout the rest of Tom Holland's Spider-Man run. Basically, we get a really good introduction scene where Peter gets home from school and is surprised by Tony, who is there under the guise of an internship that Peter applied for. In a private conversation, we get another rendition of the Great Responsibility thing.
Look, when you can do the things that I can, but you don't, and then the bad things happen, they happen because of you.
And we also get probably my favorite characterization for Peter.
I can't believe this. I was actually having a really good day today, Mr. Stark. Didn't miss my train. This perfectly good DVD player was just sitting there, and algebra test. Nailed it.
I don't know, this is just Peter for me. I absolutely adore this scene.
I can't go to Germany.
Why?
I got homework.
I'm gonna pretend you didn't say that.
I loved it in 2016 when I watched it for the first time, and I still love it to this day. Then, he shows up in the airport fight and everything is perfect. The suit is beautiful for the most part. Peter is quipping, but not letting that get in the way of what he's doing. It also has my favorite Spider-Man moment so far.
Oh, God. Hey, buddy, I think you lost this.
So, overall, Peter was given a really fucking good intro to the MCU. Soon after, they announced Tom Holland's first solo movie, and in the press tour for said movie, Tom accidentally spoiled that they had a trilogy planned. It went on to become the most consistent MCU trilogy, with one coming out every 2 years. So, without further ado, let's take a look at... So, in 2017, we got the first MCU Spider-Man movie. Continuing the story of Tom's Peter, we get introduced to his supporting characters and locations, such as Ned, his best friend, and Liz, his crush. We see that, following Civil War, Tony lets Peter keep the upgraded suit, and Peter starts to discover its true capabilities, while also uncovering a big underground weapons dealer who was using Chitauri tech that was stolen from the Avengers. I'm not going to go through the whole movie because I don't think that I need to. The movie's alright. It's definitely not my favorite Spider-Man movie, but I like it more than the Raimi ones. I don't have that much to say about this one. For me, it's really just middle of the road. I like Tom, and I like how they showcase his ideology of responsibility. I love how at Liz's party, Peter fights back about using the Spider-Man suit, and when push comes to shove, he doesn't do it because Spider-Man is supposed to save people, not be used to one-up his bullies. I also love that Peter refuses to stop looking for Vulture because that's not what he's about. He has a responsibility to keep people safe, he can't just look the other way. I love the "if this be my destiny" scene, it never fails to get to me, and I really love the final battle. There's a lot of good stuff in this movie. I feel like Peter's characterization is great. I absolutely love how many times he abandons his friends to do Spider-Man stuff, and I love that he feels like a real person. When at the Washington Monument, he hesitates because he's still afraid of heights. I like that he doubts himself and his abilities, but he still jumps in without a question to protect people. It really just screams Spider-Man, but some people still don't think so. People like to say that Tom's Peter has such a great life, but look at this. He wants to spend time with Liz at her party, boom, he finds out about the weapons deal. He has to participate in the decathlon, he gets locked in a storage facility and misses it. He wants to go to homecoming with Liz, he has to leave and stop her dad. Peter constantly abandons his personal life to be Spider-Man, and while it usually works out, he has to face consequences. May gets upset with him because he's keeping secrets and disappearing. Liz's life is basically upended in one night, and Peter has to deal with the fact that he did that. I feel like it's pretty disingenuous to say that Peter doesn't face any challenges or consequences, because just like any other Spider-Man, even more so than Andrew, Peter constantly sacrifices his personal life for the greater good. And you know what? It's really just Raimi shills that say this about Tom. So I know that they're just comparing Tom to Tobey because of Spider-Man 2, but I feel like what's going on with Tom is much more realistic than with Tobey. Because he's a teenager, he's in high school, his responsibilities as Spider-Man aren't going to completely destroy his life, but they are going to get in the way of what he actually wants to do. So as far as I'm concerned, the MCU nails this aspect of the character. Anyways, there are some things that I dislike, one of which is the AI in Peter's suit. I understand that they were trying to give Peter a reason to talk out loud like he does in the comics. However, I hate the AI. I think it's not Spider-Man. Although there are fun moments with it, it just doesn't work for me. This is another common criticism against this take on Spider-Man, and it's that he's too involved with Tony Stark. I am kinda in the middle in this one. Like I said, I don't like the AI in the suit, but people like to argue that Tony saves Peter too many times and Peter relies on Stark tech as a crutch. I'd like to remind everyone that, for the most part, Tony acts as an antagonist in this movie, and most of the Stark tech gets in Peter's way. Like, when Vulture grabs Peter, the parachute goes off and causes Peter to fall into the river. He gets engulfed by the chute, and it actually ends up putting him in more danger. And, on top of that, he has to hide things from Tony because he was told not to engage. A moment I really like is when Tony shows up to fix the ferry. It has this big, almost sinister music cue, along with the dialogue that just makes him sound like a villain.
Hi, Spider-Man. Band practice, was it?
Everyone loves to say that Tony is there to clean up Peter's messes, and while that does happen, the first time, Tony is there to clean up his own mess, and the second time, he shows up as an antagonist. For all intents and purposes, this isn't Iron Man saving him, it's Iron Man getting in his way. You gotta remember that Peter spends the majority of this movie trying to avoid Tony, but people always focus on the Stark tech and the suit abilities, and the fact that it's not a homemade suit that a broke teenager would make. It's over-designed and blah blah blah. And while I will give you points against the web pattern, because there is no reason that it should be made of 2 lines per web, the suit looks good. And it's the most comic accurate so far, even with the black lines. Recently, since the Raimi movies got re-released in theaters, people have been using those to shit on the MCU again, specifically saying that Tom Holland has no Spider-Man moments. I swear though, these people haven't actually watched the movies, because Tom has so many Spider-Man moments. In this movie alone, we have Peter's entire arc with Tony, Peter ditching Liz's party, Peter ditching the decathlon, Peter abandoning Liz at homecoming, lifting the rubble off himself, saving Vulture when his wings explode, etc. I feel like the hate against Tom Holland's Spider-Man is so forced, because people don't want the new adaptations of Spider-Man. They want Tobey Maguire. So every Spider-Man needs to be exactly the same. The suit needs to be the same. The personality, the tech, the everything. It's so annoying. Let an adaptation be an adaptation. Judge it off its own merits, not just what you liked about a movie that came out 22 years ago. So the last big criticism to look at is the idea that Vulture is an Iron Man villain. Once again, I have to ask, did anyone watch this movie? Vulture specifically wants to avoid the attention of Iron Man or the Avengers. He doesn't have a vendetta against Tony. He isn't targeting Tony. He isn't specifically mad at Tony. Instead, his motivation is tied to damage control, which was set up by Tony, yes, but the idea isn't that he's mad at Tony for this, but he's doing this because, in his own words,
the world's changing. It's time we change too.
Tony may have been the face of this, because Toomes used him as an example, but by the logic we're following, Vulture is an Avengers villain, not just an Iron Man villain. We can look at other examples of this in the MCU. Zemo's motivations are tied to the Avengers, but he only ever does anything to Cap and Tony. By the logic in this movie, Zemo is an Avengers villain, but he only interacts with those two, and he's the main villain in a Captain America movie. The Skrulls were Captain Marvel villains, but nobody bats an eye when they are the main focus of Secret Invasion. And who was the main character there? Nick Fury. But nobody says, the Skrulls are really a Captain Marvel villain. Let's look at the facts here. Vulture was introduced in a Spider-Man movie. He fought Spider-Man. He is the father of Peter's girlfriend. Shit, guys, I guess it checks out. This is an Iron Man villain. Anyways, there are a few things that I really like about this movie, one of which is the twist of Toomes being Liz's dad. Such a great twist, and the way that they build up this vibe of Peter getting what he wants beforehand is amazing. We get a montage of him getting ready for homecoming. Liz said she'd go with him. He shows up to her house, and BAM! Toome opens the door. Tone shifted. If there's one thing that John Watts nails in this trilogy, it's shifting the tone. Another great scene is when Peter, Liz, and Toomes are in the car. Peter is desperately trying to navigate the situation, because he knows Toomes is the Vulture, and Toomes is putting the pieces together and figuring out that Peter is Spider-Man. But every time Peter tries to give an alibi, Liz shuts it down, leading to him putting it together, signalized by the traffic light turning green. It's such a beautiful shot. The cinematography in these films is surprisingly good, but people choose to handpick the same few scenes and complain about how shitty they look. Yes, there are bad shots in this movie. The CGI is rough sometimes, so be it. There are actually really good examples of this looking like a real film. So truth be told, this movie's pretty good, and people who come out and say that MCU Spidey isn't Spider-Man are just wrong. Another Spider-Man moment in this movie is that Peter refuses Tony's offer for him to join the Avengers. It shows his character growth because, for the entire film, Peter is essentially itching to get into the suit. However, after the events of the movie, Peter understands that the goal isn't to keep looking at bigger threats. There are people who need him in the neighborhood. He starts the movie feeling like the small things he's doing doesn't matter, but in the end, he realizes that the small things matter just as much. The only real complaint I have is that they cover the suit in CGI, and this results in it looking pretty weird. Also, the way they did the webbing makes it almost invisible in some shots, and this is a problem in every movie, so sometimes it looks like he just has red skin. I really hope that in the future, they decide to make and commit to a real 100% physical suit. They should take a page from Deadpool and have a physical suit where the only CGI is on the eyes. Other than that, this is a great Spidey film. It has great characterization for Peter, it has a nice suit, a fun villain, a great twist, and it's really enjoyable. Let's see where it goes from here. I'm just going to lump these two together because Peter doesn't really do anything in Endgame, so there's no point in giving it a separate segment. These two movies served as the culmination of 10 years of build-up to Thanos using the Infinity Stones. Once again, the Russo brothers and the writers step into the production and characterize Peter really well. He shows up to the battle unannounced, is entirely dedicated to protecting the world, makes some jokes, and is overall just a pleasure to watch. I have a lot to say about Infinity War because that movie is such a good movie, but I'll save it for another day. For now, I just want to touch on how these movies progress Peter's character. Peter was on the front lines of the battle, going toe-to-toe with Thanos. In the first battle, Peter ends up being taken to space in an attempt to save Doctor Strange. Since Peter obviously can't breathe in space, Tony ends up giving him the Iron Spider suit. Some people believe that this is regressing his character, but it sets up some good moments later, and in reality, what more do you want? It's not like Peter chose this. He was still using the classic suit until he was forcefully given the suit as a necessity. People also criticize the fact that Peter becomes an Avenger here, but guys, please think critically for 2 seconds. Peter refused this. Once again, this isn't an active choice by Peter, so it's not undermining his decision. Besides, the entire point of Homecoming is Peter coming to realize that the world needs a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. However, that doesn't mean that when the world is threatened by something greater, he isn't going to step up. As he says himself,
You can't be a friendly neighborhood Spider-Man if there's no neighborhood.
So nothing in these movies contradicts his character arc so far. Then, at the end of Infinity War, Peter ends up being one of the characters who gets snapped away. The big thing to talk about is that Tony dies in the final battle of Endgame. This is a big moment for Peter, as so far, Tony has been a mentor in his superhero journey. This sets the stage for the things that Peter is going to have to deal with in the future, and with that out of the way, let's take a look at that. Far From Home is a divisive one. Serving as the final movie in the Infinity Saga, it acts as an epilogue to Endgame, using Peter's own personal journey for that. When it came out, it was met with glowing reviews. People loved it. But then High Top Films made his review on it, and public perception then changed. And now people like to call it the worst Spider-Man film. Did we watch the same movie? This movie has some things that could have been better, sure. It has some things that are convenient and should have been thought out more, sure. But the worst Spider-Man movie? Did you watch The Amazing Spider-Man 2? So, as I mentioned, this movie acts as an epilogue for Endgame, and it follows Peter as he wants to take a much-needed break and go on vacation with his class. However, his break is bombed by Nick Fury, who recruits him to fight some elemental villains alongside Mysterio. I quite like this movie. It's fun, it's consistent, and it, again, has some great Spider-Man moments. People like to bash on Peter because he doesn't want to be Spider-Man in this movie, and that goes against the great responsibility lesson. But guys, may I remind you, Spider-Man 2 literally sees Peter give up on being Spider-Man for a good 30 minutes. In this one, Peter just wants a break, but he's constantly interrupted by hero stuff, and he goes to do it every time. So people are just picking and choosing when the great responsibility lesson actually matters, because when it's the Raimi films, they can do nothing wrong, but when the MCU does it, it's the biggest problem ever. I was looking into the criticisms that people have for this movie, and one of the things I saw is that people think this movie and Spider-Man 2 aren't comparable. They're wrong though. They say that Peter isn't ignoring a world-ending threat in Spider-Man 2, so giving up Spider-Man is less selfish. In both movies, Peter ignores some serious threats because he needs a break. So I don't want to hear about Tobey's Peter being so good when he has done the same shit and you glaze him for it. So I won't go through the movie scene by scene, but I'll take a deeper look here because I want to refute some points. I already mentioned one of the biggest ones, but other than that, there are some general complaints that carry over from Homecoming. They say that Peter isn't broke, he uses Stark Tech too much, he doesn't face any consequences, Uncle Ben doesn't matter, Mysterio is an Iron Man villain, shut the fuck up. Let's break it down. In a deleted scene for this movie, Peter actually has to sell some of his toys to get enough money to go on the trip. Although it was deleted, I'm pretty sure they added it back in an extended version that was released in theaters. While it wasn't a focus of his character in this adaptation, it doesn't mean that it's not there. This movie didn't need to look at that aspect, because it already had other plot points to look at. Not every Spider-Man movie needs to be about how Peter can't catch a break. This movie is already about him wanting to take some time for himself and not trusting his spider sense. Let Peter have his character growth without trying to shove more into it. The second one is that Peter relies too heavily on Stark Tech. I disagree. With the exception of the fact that Tony is the one who designed the classic Spider-Man suit, I think the use of Stark Tech works perfectly here. This is an advanced universe where Peter was fortunate enough to get into good graces with Tony. It makes more sense than the other two Peters who just managed to make these super dope and effective suits when they can't even make ends meet. The Stark Tech is a great way to introduce a lot of Spidey gadgets that would otherwise be ignored because a broke teen can't make that shit. As much flack as it gets, Peter doesn't use it as a crutch. He is still using his brain to do things, and he ends up making his own suit this time around. In my opinion, it's really not as bad as it's made out to be. Next point, Peter doesn't face any consequences.
Hungry? So sorry. I thought that you could sense that.
Welcome to the Avengers. Look good on you.
Spider-Man's name is Peter Parker. What the
Next, the Uncle Ben thing is true. With the way that this trilogy plays out, it really seems like they completely ignored Ben rather than just not showing his death. I'm personally fine with this. They reference him, but I don't think that Ben needs to be shown or talked about constantly. Now, one might argue that it takes emotional depth away from this Peter, but the Uncle Ben stuff wouldn't be as hard-hitting if we didn't see his relationship with Peter. In my opinion, the stuff with Uncle Ben only works when we see it happen, which is why it worked so well in The Amazing Spider-Man. So if they tried to lean into it with the MCU after deciding to skip over that part of the origin, then it just wouldn't have worked. But I can totally understand why some fans take issue with this, so I can't really say that they're wrong about this one. Now, the last big thing is that people still think Mysterio is an Iron Man villain. Mysterio's motivations tie back into Stark again, and he uses the Stark Tech to achieve his goals. However, once again, he's a Spider-Man villain. He shows up in Peter's movie, has a hero-villain dynamic with Peter. Just because he has a history with Stark, it doesn't mean that he isn't a Spider-Man villain. People say that Peter doesn't have any villains, but they ignore that Peter has a relationship with both Toomes and Beck, so it doesn't matter if their motivations relate back to Tony. Anyways, let's look at some of the things that I like and some of the things that are pretty stupid. I like what this movie does with Peter's character, and I wish that there was more of it. I feel like this version of Peter is more relatable. His goals are simple, he wants to hang out with his crush, he wants to enjoy his vacation, but he keeps getting pulled away by his responsibilities. He's stressed out. The world expects him to be the next Iron Man, and Tony seems to want him to be the next Iron Man, giving him the pair of Edith glasses that has access to a network of killer drones. This allows for Mysterio to swoop in and start manipulating him. He acts friendly, encouraging Peter to geek out about things he loves, giving him pep talks when Fury is being harsh, and worst of all, he plays with Peter's emotions about Stark by sacrificing himself to stop the elementals. Coupled with Peter not trusting his spider sense, all Peter sees in Beck is a selfless hero who just saved the world, a perfect candidate for the next Iron Man. So he gives up Edith, and very quickly learns that he made a huge mistake. From that point on, Peter goes into full Spider-Man mode, where he stops worrying about his vacation and focuses on his responsibility to stop Beck and save his friends. This culminates in one of the coolest Spider-Man fight scenes, where Peter fully relies on his spider sense and destroys a bunch of drones with his eyes closed. I've seen a criticism of this fight that says Peter's flip at the end here is useless. I'm so confused. It was in a debate about Spider-Man and his action scenes. People were claiming that the Raimi films have the best action scenes and no other movies come close. Then, this drone scene was brought up, and in response, they said that this scene would be up there if it weren't for the useless flip at the end. You mean the flip that Peter uses to destroy the last drones? It had a purpose. I understand that everyone has their own tastes, and what might be a dope action scene for one person might be lame to someone else. However, saying that this is a useless flip is a weird reason to say that an action scene isn't as good as the Raimi ones. So I don't know. Anyways, getting back on track, I really like the way they did Mysterio. Everything about him works. I love that he's completely unhinged, so much so that his motivation ties back into Civil War and Tony Stark calling his illusion tech barf. He's so caught up by it that he imagines the audience laughing when in Civil War nobody was. I love how Mysterio is presented as a manipulator, so not only is he fooling the world with his illusions, he's just generally a manipulative person. It fits perfectly with his character. I love that the suit he wears for the majority of the movie is just a mocap suit. It makes so much sense, and I didn't even think of it. Before watching the movie, I assumed that he would just be a sorcerer using magic to make the illusions. However, I also love that they adapted the comic suit perfectly. They kept the fishbowl while also making a modern redesign of the suit. He looks great, his acting's great, his character's great, they did an amazing job. The illusion scene is one of the best sequences in a Spider-Man movie, and it leads to a really great climax, so I think that they just nailed it. Other than that, there are a couple things that could have been better. The scene where Peter almost kills Brad is a bit clunky. It gets shit on a lot, and while I do think that it's an odd choice, you gotta think about the purpose that movie scenes serve. So, what purpose does the drone scene serve? Well, it showcases that Peter is making mistakes and not using Edith properly, contributing to him doubting himself, while also showing the capabilities of Edith and the drones. It has a purpose, whether clunky or not. Anyways, the way that they deal with Edith is pretty dumb. When Peter gives Beck the glasses, they say that the owner needs to do a full ownership transfer, which Peter does, and he gives Beck the glasses. Then, Beck dies, and Peter just puts them back on and takes control, despite Beck never passing the ownership back to Peter. Also, Beck's motivations are revealed in an exposition dump, although it has the funniest callback to the first Iron Man, so I'm not too mad about it. Exposition dumps suck though. The MCU really needs to stop with the major exposition dumps. One scene that people might think is lazy is the scene where Peter finds out Mysterio is a liar. I've seen people say that Peter webbing the projector and then it activating when he was with MJ is convenient, but I think it works well. Mysterio and the Elementals have pre-planned actions. That's the only way any of this works. So, when adding Peter to the mix, it was always a risk that he would do something that interferes with the illusion, such as accidentally hitting a drone with his webs. That makes perfect sense. And then, the projector activates when Mysterio and his team are doing a test of the next elemental attack. Boom. It makes sense. It's not lazy. It works perfectly fine. Anyways, my last real complaint is that I wish we got more to do with Peter. I really like what we got, don't get me wrong, but I feel like his pain could have been explored a little more, specifically regarding his self-doubt. A lot of the conflict Peter faces is that he wants to take the break, and he constantly reaffirms that he wants to spend time with MJ. He wants to go on vacation, yada yada. But aside from one scene at the end, Peter never talks about Tony, or Infinity War, or anything like that. I just wish that there was a little more focus on that. The third and final movie in this trilogy is No Way Home, a direct follow-up to Far From Home, continuing right from the post-credits scene. Right off the bat, though, there was a hell of a build-up before this movie came out. First, there was a whole scandal about how the MCU and Sony had a falling out, and the final movie of this trilogy would be entirely set in a new universe, without any supporting characters from the MCU. This happened literally right after Far From Home came out, and there was a lot of public outrage about it, because everyone wanted Peter to stay in the MCU. Anyways, Marvel and Sony reached a new deal calling for at least 2 more MCU Spidey films, but that deal seems to have been extended as there are talks of a new trilogy for Tom Holland. Anyways, following this drama, production started on this third film, and it became the most secretive MCU project ever. The name of the film wasn't revealed until less than a year before the movie came out, and even then, first they trolled everyone and released 3 fake names. Then, the trailer didn't come out until August of 2021, which was only 4 months before the movie came out. In this time, a lot of information about the movie was leaked. The first thing being that the villains from the old movies were coming back. When this news broke, people started theorizing that all the old Spider-Men would be joining them. Jamie Foxx, who plays Electro, made an Instagram post talking about it, where he posted fan art of all 3 Spideys versus his character. This post was quickly deleted, but it was fuel to the fire that got everyone really excited for this movie. Then, there were more leaks. An image of Andrew Garfield in his suit against a blue screen got leaked, and then there was a video of it, and then there were images of toys and all 3 actors together, and Andrew Garfield denied being in the movie, but allegedly Tobey claimed to be in it. It was a wild time to be a Spider-Man fan, and these theories ran wild because there was no real information about the movie. Personally, I didn't want the other Spider-Men to be in it, because I wanted it to focus on Tom Holland's Peter. This is his trilogy, and I thought that if they brought the other Peters in, it would turn into fan service that takes away from the character building that they could give to the actual main Peter. Of course, when the movie came out, it was to nobody's surprise that Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield were both in the movie. This one follows Peter as he tries to navigate his life after being outed by Mysterio. When his public identity gets in the way of him and his friends going to college, he goes to Doctor Strange, who offers to use magic to make the world forget that he's Spider-Man. However, Peter keeps trying to add exceptions to the spell, causing it to be corrupted and blast a hole in the multiverse, bringing a bunch of old villains into the MCU. From there, Peter tries to catch them before realizing that sending them home will lead to pretty much all of their deaths, so he decides to try to change their fates before sending them home. Now, generally, I like this movie. It's entertaining and has a great arc for Peter, and I personally find most of the old villains are more engaging here than they were in their own movies. However, upon rewatching it, the movie and the whole trilogy, they're not as good as I remember. Now, I know I've been defending this trilogy for the entire video, and I don't think that this is a bad Spider-Man series. I just think that structurally these movies could be better, and the side characters could have been a lot better. It really just hit me upon rewatch, but the side characters in these films don't have much personality, especially Ned. Like, in No Way Home, Ned is essentially a plot device to get the story going after May's death. All the side characters are consistent throughout the trilogy. They don't grow, they aren't challenged in any way, they are just there for comedic relief, which usually doesn't land. At least in the other 2 trilogies and in the game, Peter's supporting cast are given their own challenges, their own arcs, and they don't always necessarily land the way they're supposed to, but they're there. They're trying. In the MCU, there is no focus put on anyone else. Anyways, I'm going to talk generally about what I like and dislike, because I don't have much else to say for this one. I love the relationship between Peter and Norman. It easily beats the rivalry from Tobey's first movie, and the final battle is one of my favorites throughout all 10 of these Spidey films. They finally let Tom shine with some serious scenes for this version of Peter, and I want them to do this more. The 3 Spider-Men are amazing together, and the dialogue just feels so natural. It makes me want a spin-off where it's just these 3 hanging out. I love the upgrades they gave to the villains, and aside from Sandman and the Lizard, the villains are major improvements from their movies. I'm just a little disappointed that Connors had such a small role, because he was my favorite from the previous movies. I love the suit at the end, and the ending itself paves the road for some great stories to come. There are plenty of funny moments in this movie, and one of my favorites is when Peter sees Electro and has this exchange with Ned.
Osborn?
No, he was green. This guy's blue.
It's a small moment, and really not like a genius comedic thing, but it's cute. I like what they did with Norman and Octavius especially, and when the Goblin comes out, the movie gets really good. I love the way the tone shifts and stays serious after that. It's a much needed aspect that was somewhat missing in Far From Home especially, but in both of these movies really. Other than that though, I feel like this movie is kind of mediocre. The pacing is a bit weird, especially with the extended version. It's fun to see a bunch of the deleted scenes, and some of them are improvements, but a lot of them just bog the movie down. I think that the first half hour is easily the worst out of the MCU trilogy. It takes the setup for what could be a really great and grounded story, and immediately tries to mold it into the same tone as the previous two films, which really doesn't work. They should have played the identity reveal more seriously. Once they get into damage control, it gets better, but I still think that there could have been a lot more with this segment. Anyways, once Peter botches the spell, the movie gets better, but it's still somewhat unengaging until Peter decides to take the box from Strange. Once he does that, the movie gets a lot better. The thing is, there's a good amount of this movie that I don't really like. I hate the scene between May and Otto. It is, in my opinion, the most clunky joke I've ever heard, and it breaks down if you think about it for more than 2 seconds. There are a number of plot holes or inconsistencies, like how Electro never learned Peter's identity in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but is still present here when the spell was supposed to bring people over who knew that Peter Parker was Spider-Man. Electro also says,
"Don't make me a murderer, Peter."
Despite killing, 8 people in The Amazing Spider-Man 2? I used to find that the MCU trilogy was my favorite Spider-Man trilogy, but I just can't say that it lands for me anymore. I still find them to be a lot of fun, and I enjoy these ones more than the Raimi films, but truth be told, they could have been a lot better. So, that's gonna do it for the MCU trilogy. It gets a lot of hate that I don't think it deserves, but it most definitely isn't the best Spider-Man adaptation. I'm looking forward to the next trilogy, cause I feel like with the ending of No Way Home, there's some real potential to make the best live-action trilogy so far. Anyways, I'm gonna end it here. I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, please consider subscribing for more content like this. Next time I talk about Spider-Man, I'll be taking a look at the Spider-Verse films, and that will be the finale of this Spider-Man Retrospective series. I don't know if it'll be the next video, but it will be coming. Until then, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye-bye!